saying, well, it's vice versa. So those are questions that have to be dealt with. We consider those people, recycling and diversion rates, impact on the environment, safety, the net cost, the county budget, the $576,000 that's up there. These are all the issues that we are addressing and are trying to make better. And we all know that you can't always get everything you want, but if we can move forward, that's not a bad thing. We all know that we used to have landfills operated by the counties or in partnership with a city or a city landfill in the past, and that those were closed, and the private sector helped solve the problem that existed to dispose of waste after that. And we wound up with two large-scale transfer stations, one in Willits and one in Ukiah, and that we have a patchwork of smaller transfer stations, which by their very nature are going to be inefficient. Small transfer stations are not efficient. They're not the easiest way to get the economies of scale, to keep the cost down, whether it be the subsidy of the county or for the ratepayer who pays money at the gate. But the alternative is no service, which is not acceptable, because if you live in the county, you expect that you should get some service, and often the people who live in the remote areas get less services in all the other areas. So if that's the one service they get, that's not such a big deal. And the other thing that we find is that if you don't provide that service, you're going to pay the man one way or the other, because you wind up with illegal dumping and the $4.50 a ton that is paid by the waste hauler to MSWA. Big part of their budget goes to picking up illegal dumping, so that you really haven't saved any money. You saved on the subsidy over here and you give it back somewhere else. So the real key, it's a balancing act, and we recognize that. So the nice thing about the privatization of the large-scale transfer stations is there are no hidden costs. It's a pay-as-you-go operation. When we started closing landfills in this county, we wound up having to pay closure and post-closure fees that were not anticipated for whatever reason, but somebody had to pay them. The people who dumped garbage didn't pay them. The people who came later had to pay them. So one nice thing about the way we're working with transfer stations now is the user sees the true cost, and it tends to aid in diversion, and so you wind up with a little bit better across-the-board benefit. So we don't think that the private sector is a bad thing. We think that it can be a good thing, and it's not always appropriate, but often it is. So I think we have control costs at the transfer stations because it's in our best interest to control costs. You can't always pass on costs to the ratepayer. The ratepayer will stand up on their hind legs and say, I'm not going to pay it anymore. They'll either be in here or they'll dump in the streams and on the sides of the road. So we're aware of that, and it's in our interest, if we're going to have something left over for profit, to control our costs. Now, I happen to be more sympathetic than a lot of people realize to the staff, because not only have I worked with the private sector companies, but I've been the person on the government side of the table more than a couple of times. And I have been the one that had to explain to the private sector that, look, we have some institutional problems in the governmental unit that you may not be aware of and you may not even care about. But I'm aware of those, and I'm sensitive to those. And I do recognize that if you strip away revenue, you may not have enough revenue to cover fixed costs for other functions that government should be doing. Oh, I would say in the report, I noticed we're going to strip away revenue with this proposal. They didn't mention that we'll also strip away costs. And I'm not convinced that some of these small transfer stations, the way they are financed now, have a net positive cash flow. So if you strip away the revenue, but you strip away more costs than revenue, you'll have a positive impact and a reduction in your subsidy, which is really the big elephant in the room here today. What's the net cost of providing waste disposal and eliminating bad impacts on the environment? So that if we can come with a proposal that will reduce the subsidy, not eliminate jobs, and get to the same objective that we all have, then I think it's worth exploring. I can tell you that, let's just say that we don't feel the staff has been absolutely forthcoming with the information that's available. And so as a result, we don't have in our proposal the net benefit to the county, which is crucial for you guys to make a decision. We recognize that. But, you know, Jerry has a bachelor's degree in accounting, and I've worked for years in governmental accounting. Do you think that we can't do dollar and cents analysis like that? Do you wonder, are we that stupid that we didn't bring it when we are trying to make a point? I mean, is there, is there some common sense that maybe there's something missing here? We're ready to do that, and we're ready to cooperate with that. And we have the expertise, I think, to help the county to do that at no cost to the county. You're going to have staff time involved. But if you're really looking to put dollars in the general fund in some other fund besides subsidizing solid waste, which could be police, could be ambulance service, could be arts, could be anything, we think we can be helpful in moving those dollars out of that subsidy and into the other areas that people need services in. Now, we recognize that you have to do a holistic analysis because you folks need to operate a department, the solid waste division, and if we take away revenue and don't give you any way to reduce your costs, then we will be asking them to do the impossible. And I mean, we already asked government to do the impossible to some degree, but we don't want to go any further than you're already dealing with. So anyway, I think when all the smoke clears, we have a recommendation. After listening to the discussion, after reading the staff report, recognizing our own business approach to things, we think what we need is the board to consider directing staff to cooperate with us maybe a little bit more, to give us information, internal information, that will allow us to go option A, this is what it costs to operate this way. Option B, this is what it would cost to operate with privatization of the sites that we've talked about. What are the possible savings? And let the chips fall where they may. We think perhaps a subcommittee would be helpful because it's my experience, if you put outsiders and staff in the room and you're asking about analyzing their department, I mean, let's face it, human nature being what it is, that's a tough situation to make flow. So we think, maybe a couple of supervisors who would be part of the process to make sure that we have a fair, impartial, complete, transparent analysis would be a good way to go. So what would we wind up with? We'd wind up with that complete analysis that would show you what you're doing now, what we think it would cost to do it. Would you be able to continue on the critical functions that you have to take care of, under the option that we would suggest? Put it in a readable format where the numbers read themselves, and then you folks, as Supervisor Colfax pointed out, would have the ability to make an intelligent discussion because it would be a complete analysis. We didn't bring an incomplete analysis here today because we didn't want to. But our choice was to do nothing and walk away or to try to continue to solve problems, which is what we do for a living. So I'm available for questions, and if Jerry would like to say something at the pleasure of the chair, just tell us what you'd like.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Ward first, and then we'll submit any questions after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jerry Ward, Solid Waste to Willits. As Emmett just told you, it wasn't our intent to bring in a proposal that didn't show what the subsidy were. When I first approached the Solid Waste Division, former Solid Waste Division manager, the only information I was granted was the budget, 4510s on the, you can pull it up on the internet. So I pull it up, and it doesn't itemize anything by sites. And I just emailed him back and asked him for simple things like, what's the revenue that you generate from each of the sites? What kind of volumes do you generate? What do you pay your site attendants? I don't need to know the names. I just need to know what they are, their salaries. Are they part-time? Most of them are part-time. Do you pay benefits? If so, how much are the benefits? I was told by that former solid waste director that that information was not a public record.